Business as usual, Episode 1 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier begins with Falcon getting dressed up, packing Captain America's shield and heading out. It turns out Falcon has a big job ahead of him. He's working with the US military and is tasked with going after a criminal organization known as LAF. He's told to be subtle, watching from afar as three men hijack a plane over the dry, choked deserts of Libya. Falcon eventually flies out and fights his way on board. Only, the captain takes a bullet to the head, prompting those on board to abandon ship. Falcon fights against his foes in mid-air, taking them out one by one and thwarting the threat. His target in all this is a US pilot who has been kidnapped, eventually culminating in Falcon snatching the guy up, stopping the bad guys, and flying down to safety. On the back of this mission, Falcon does some electrical work outside at a bar in Tunisia. With Torres by his side, we learn that he's been working at the Air Force for 6 months now. While they sit and talk, a grateful man arrives and thanks Sam for helping bring his wife back. Sam's stay there is brief, as he heads back to Washington for a press conference. He talks to them all about Captain America's sacrifice and what the blip means for everyone here. He tells them all they need new heroes for this new world, paying homage to Cap's shield in the process. Symbolically, it's preserved in a glass box for now. With the world struggling to get back on its feet, Rhodes and Falcon talk about the New World Order and deliberate over what this means for them going forward. Meanwhile, Bucky continues to suffer from bad dreams. He's haunted by the past, and with him now serving as a civilian following his discharge, therapy is a mandatory condition. He opens up a little to her and admits that he's crossed another name off his list. He's been ignoring calls from Sam too, something his therapist tells him he needs to stop doing. After all, his loneliness is going to be his own personal hell. She implores Bucky to use his gifts now that he's free. The first step here comes in the form of meeting a girl, courtesy of a sweet old man setting things up for him. That evening, he meets her at work where they decide to play Battleship. However, talk of dead relatives soon sends Bucky out again. In Delacroix, Louisiana, Sam rocks up to see his sister, Sarah, and his nephews. With the world back to normal and finances strained, Sarah wants to sell the family boat, but Sam isn't enthused by this idea. Instead, he asks her about money and suggests he pitch in and help, determined to turn this situation around for the family. This brings the pair to the bank where they try to get a loan. Unfortunately, they're denied thanks to 5 years of no income. Of course, this is all because of the blip. Defeated, the duo head off with Sam determined to get a loan no matter what. In Switzerland, a whole gang of people join together and put on masks, causing chaos to ensue as a bank is robbed. Whoever the ringleader is, they're not messing around and make short work of those in attendance. On the back of this attack, Torres messages Sam and sends him over the footage of this man, who claims to be the leader of the Flag Smashers. However, Sam and the others have bigger problems. On TV, the Department of Defense announce a new hero. This comes in the form of a brand new Captain America, with a man named John Walker taking the shield up and donning the same costume. This is, of course, all a big ploy, but it's one that has Sam closing his eyes in despair. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier gets off to a relatively tepid start, with a solid 10 minutes of CGI action at the start, and some surprisingly grounded character work. In fact, although Sam is the lead star here, it's actually Bucky who's the more interesting character so far. His personal demons and nightmares look like they could be explored in more detail across the coming episodes, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Of course, this isn't the first time the MCU has tackled lasting effects from big battle scars, Iron Man 3 and WandaVision for example, but the 6-part series looks like it could be gearing up for a much deeper exploration of that in coming episodes. For now though, the first episode feels like business as usual for Marvel, and fans will undoubtedly love this. However, unlike WandaVision's unique hook, all the usual Marvel tropes are here already, including the disposable villain and CGI-driven action. It's still early days though, so we'll have to wait and see what happens across the rest of the season, but this looks like it'll be a fun romp to tide us over until the next Marvel project. The new Captain America, Episode 2 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier begins with a look at our new Captain America. Or, more specifically, our Great Pretender. John Walker is nervous, which is hardly surprising given the big shoes he needs to fill. This is something he even admits himself later on when John is paraded around as a public figure on tour. While he's interviewed on TV, Bucky watches and seethes with anger. He heads straight for Sam, who admits he has bigger things to deal with right now. The Flag Smashers are rallying behind our disposable villain, and Sam is heading up to Munich to check it out. After all, this could be the next in a long line of the big three: androids, aliens, and wizards. After disagreeing over whether Doctor Strange is actually a wizard or not, Bucky decides to tag along with him. High up in the air, Falcon gracefully soars out the plane, while Bucky unceremoniously tumbles to the ground. With Redwing buzzing around, Sam guides Bucky to his exact location as they prepare to go after the Flag Smashers. After bickering about the number of goons outside, Sam uses Redwing to suss out they're holding hostages in the two lorries. The lorries take off and the pair rush out the building in hot pursuit. Bucky jumps aboard the first, while the truck behind remains completely nonchalant to his presence. Anyway, those hostages actually happen to be super soldiers, as the leader, Carly, punches Bucky square in the chest and launches him out the back. A fight ensues atop these two lorries, a well-choreographed, slick affair which immediately sees John Walker shows up as Captain America to lend a hand. Unfortunately, everything goes awry. The Flag Smashers are too much, and the group eventually find themselves thrown off the trucks and stuck on the road. Sam and Bucky are eventually picked up by John Walker, though as banter ensues between the group. It turns out Walker found the pair thanks to Redwing. He hacked their location and head up as soon as he found out. The constant gag regarding Bucky's stares continue as Sam and Bucky eventually walk away from Walker and back to the jet. Together, they fly to Baltimore, where Bucky introduces Falcon to Isaiah. He's an old war vet, someone that Bucky knew back in '51. As we soon learn, he actually has powers himself, but was thrown into prison for 30 years. As Falcon and Bucky head outside, cops stop them both and ask to see their ID. Unfortunately, Bucky is arrested thanks to missing his court-issued therapy session. While things momentarily look bleak, John Walker shows up and manages to pull some strings, helping to free him. Meanwhile, the Flag Smashers regroup with Carly, who's referred to as Robin Hood by her comrades. However, she receives a message from a private number, someone who tells her she's taken what's theirs, and she's a marked woman. Back with Sam and Bucky, they're taken into therapy with Dr. Rayner, where they're told to face each other. Well, therapy doesn't go well, eventually leading to Sam walking away, and Bucky reminding Dr. Rayner of Rule 2. When they leave, John Walker suggests they team up, but both Sam and Bucky reject that notion. Instead, they head off to learn more about the Flag Smashers themselves. Skipping back to Slovakia, the gang loads supplies on a plane. One of the soldiers sacrifices himself for the cause, throwing himself into a barrage of bullets from soldiers on the ground as the plane flies off. As the episode this week closes out, Sam and Bucky decide to visit Zemo in prison. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier returns with more action, more comedy hijinks, and lots more racially charged commentary. Instead of organically adding all this into the series, though, the three different tones feel awkwardly jarring in conflict with the story being told. Racism is a hot topic at the moment, and racial equality is obviously something we should all be striving to make happen. However, injecting it into a movie series like the MCU that's had absolutely no issue with it until now just feels awkward. The gags surrounding Black Falcon in particular felt really forced, and it's even more surprising that Black Panther isn't even mentioned during this conversation. Instead, he's referenced elsewhere, with Falcon calling Bucky White Panther. Away from that though, the action is good and well choreographed, with lots of jokes that work well as far as Marvel humor goes. However, alongside such serious societal issues like racism, one can't help but feel the show is trying to have its cake and eat it too. The characters are undoubtedly interesting, though, and there's definitely a lot of intrigue with this new dynamic featuring John Walker. At the same time, this series doesn't really offer up anything that original or different to what we've already seen before from the MCU, especially off the back of WandaVision. Still, it's early days, and there's plenty of time for that to change across the coming episodes. For now, though, Falcon and the Winter Soldier isn't quite soaring as high as it could. Power Broker, Episode 3 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier begins in Germany as John Walker leads his group straight into a warehouse asking where Carly and the others are. Unfortunately, he receives a wad of spit in the face for his troubles. Getting nowhere, they decide to turn their attention closer to home. In Munich, Bucky heads into a maximum security facility, finding himself face to face with Hydra loyalist Zemo. Bucky asks about the super soldiers, but of course for Zemo to spill the truth, it would mean releasing Zemo from prison. Despite talking to Sam about the implications of doing this, the breakout has already begun. Moments pass, and Zemo, in disguise as a guard, busts out of prison and comes face to face with them in the garage. Eventually this trio form an uneasy alliance, flying out with Zemo in his private jet. While they do, Zemo brings up the danger of putting super soldiers on pedestals, throwing shade at Steve, but also mentioning Red Skull as an example of how this can go horribly wrong. Touching down in Madripoor, the group assume identities and are told by Zemo to stay in character no matter what. Well, things quickly go awry when they head to the bar, with Zemo encouraging the Winter Soldier, Bucky, to act on his command. Eventually this act of aggression is enough for them to get the nod to visit the big boss, Selby. Once there, Sam runs into trouble when Sarah rings. He's forced to talk on speakerphone to her, eventually leading to a bounty being placed on their heads. Out on the road, they run into Sharon, who takes them away to safety. Alone, Sam strikes a deal with her. He agrees to help clear her name in exchange for her help. Using Sharon's know-how, they find a shipping container, but it's completely empty, at least at first glance. A hidden door leads through to Dr. Najer's laboratory. Unfortunately, they're not alone, as numerous bounty hunters show up at the shipping yard looking to make a quick buck off Sam and Bucky. Sitting Najer down with a gun to their head, this scientist breaks the news about what's going on. When Hydra was disbanded in the past, he was recruited to work on the super solder serum. He managed to optimize it too, producing 20 different vials. Those were, unfortunately, stolen by Carly and her gang. With no other serums available, it seems like the end of this production line. Zemo bides his time, stealing a gun from under the table and taking off after shooting Najer dead. At least, that's how it appears at first glance. In reality, he's actually helped bide some time to take out the bounty hunters with Sharon. Giving themselves some precious time, Zemo and the others take off. It's here where our characters splinter. In Latvia, Bucky remains determined to take the shield from the new Captain America. He finds a tracker on the floor, though, and heads off to investigate. When it does, he finds himself face to face with AO, who's bloodlusting for Zemo. Falcon and the Winter Soldier returns with an episode that feels like a bridge between the opening and closing chapters of this mini-series. In its simplest form, this series has really felt like a feature film cut up into segmented parts. While there's nothing inherently wrong with that, the roller coaster ride of ups and downs does make for a somewhat disjointed watch. However, with no awkwardly contrived moments of racial commentary this time, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The whole world is watching. Episode 4 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier begins in Wakanda 6 years ago. Bucky sits in front of the dancing fire with AO. Flashes of the past come back as Bucky shakes and struggles to hold back tears. Eventually, though, AO tells him that he's free. We then jump back to the present, where AO confronts Bucky and tells him they're coming for Zemo. When AO leaves, Bucky heads in and updates Sam and Zemo, letting them know AO is on her way. However, a bombing from Carly interrupts them as they get to work trying to get their revenge against her group. Well, this begins with hunting for Danya Madani. Bucky and Sam's heavy touch doesn't quite do the trick, but Zemo does manage to charm the kids with his Turkish delights. Zemo finds out Danya is dead, but beyond that, refuses to open up and tell the others all he knows. As he so eloquently puts it, this is leverage. Meanwhile, Carly contemplates her next move, thinking Cap's shield should be destroyed and justifying her actions by claiming she's a revolutionary. While she holds the serum in her hands, Sam and Bucky catch up with John. It's a short-lived conversation in truth, one steep with tension as they head off to find Carly. Carly is, of course, at Tanya's funeral. Sam heads in alone to talk after the ceremony, likening her pain to what he's felt in the past. While they talk, John loses his patience and decides to head in gung-ho. This causes absolute anarchy as Zemo chases Carly and corners her. While she's pinned down, Zemo stamps on the different syringes holding the super soldier serum. John comes in and knocks him down though, taking the last one for himself. Carly is forced to regroup, but finds herself between a rock and a hard place. Specifically, Power Broker messages through and demands she hand over the serum. Only, that's obviously not possible given Zemo has stamped them all out. Meanwhile, tensions run high in the apartment building across the way. John Walker demands Zemo be taken into custody with him. Ayo shows up with the other Wakandan soldiers though, claiming that she has jurisdiction wherever she goes. While fighting erupts in the room, Zemo slips out. John Walker, beaten and ashamed, contemplates his next move after realizing the Wakandan soldiers aren't even super soldiers. This is enough to make him seriously contemplate using the serum. Carly rings Sarah and asks her to broker a meeting with Sam. It's certainly an unnerving moment for her, but Sarah keeps her cool long enough to entice Sam and Bucky to head over and confront Carly. Only, this is actually a distraction to isolate John Walker. Sam and Bucky realize this at the last minute and race off to try and find him. This fighting eventually leads to Carly and her crew killing Lemur. John is enraged and chases the flag smashers through the streets. Eventually he corners one of the men and beats him down with Cap's shield. With blood staining the shield, John looks around as a whole crowd have gathered, taking pictures and snapping video. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier returns with a much better episode this time around, one chock full of action and contrasting ideas. Carly may not be the most interesting villain in the MCU, but she is one that steps beyond the generic bad guy wanting to destroy the world. In a way, she has a lot in common with John and the others, although their methods are obviously very different. The symbolic ending with the blood-staining Cap's shield is significant for how Roger's memory has been tarnished, and it'll be interesting to see how the crowds react to this going forward. On the other hand though, we've got the Wakandans, led by Ayo, demanding Zemo be handed over and claiming they have jurisdiction everywhere. Now, they may have struck a deal for Zemo, but this kind of radicalized thinking is exactly what led to the Civil War in the first place, so it's kind of ironic that it's been thrown in here. For now, this superhero action series has been a bit of a mixed bag, but this episode is a much improved chapter. With 2 episodes to go, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is poised to deliver some decent drama going forward. Truth, Episode 5 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier begins with John Walker running, grief-stricken, bubbling with rage, and conflicted over what he's just done. On his knees, he cradles the shield before compassing himself. Time to go to work. As he walks off, he finds Sam and Bucky who both try and talk him out of doing anything stupid. Part of that includes handing the shield over, which John is not willing to do. This inevitably leads to a fight between Walker, Sam and Bucky. The shield is the ultimate prize here, and with Walker eventually defeated, Bucky symbolically drops the bloodied shield by Sam, who picks it up. Meanwhile, Carly has gone missing, but her followers are all brought into custody. Torres briefs Sam and the others over the issues involving Walker, and he admits everything has escalated to involve numerous government authorities. Sam is determined to intervene though. John Walker is stripped of his title and authority, where he grits his teeth and tries in vain to speak his piece before the Senate. Because of his reputation, he's not court-martialed, but he is disgraced and evidently angry. After court, Walker decides to go and speak to Lemur's parents about what happened to their son. While sat on a bench, he's approached by a woman called Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, or Val for short. She tells him that he's valuable to her after the serum injection, and promises to be in touch. Despite what we've been led to believe, Carly and her followers march out into the open, back to their old hangout spot in Prague. Carly is not happy and informs them all that the movement is now ready. They're going to strike. in Sokovia, Zemo pays his respects to the fallen. However, Bucky shows up with a gun. He's determined to finish this and fires. Only, the gun is empty, and he symbolically drops the bullets to the ground. Instead, he hands over Zemo to the Wakandans who, as we'll remember, have authority anywhere and can do whatever they want. In Baltimore, Sam returns to see Isaiah Bradley. He's bitter and angry at the world. However, Sam eventually sits him down, and the pair talk about the past. Bradley's story is harrowing, a tale about saving his brothers, but consequently being experimented on for 30 years. Sam is determined to tell someone, but Bradley is certain the world is unchanged. In fact, he even goes so far as to tell Sam no self-respecting black man would want to be Captain America. Instead, Sam decides to head home and fix up his boat. Bucky shows up too, and decides this looks like fun, helping out. In the morning, Sam and Bucky discuss the fate of the Shield while playing a game of boomerang. Eventually this sees Sam train with the Shield to become the new Captain America. Elsewhere, Carly meets up with Batroc outside in Central Park. Hey wait, aren't all the authorities after her? How did she teleport to New York? And prepares a coup to strike back against their oppressor. Well, nothing screams exciting superhero action like fixing a boat. Honestly, 10 minutes of this episode could so easily have been cut out with this, and tonally the segments completely jar against the more somber and serious issues at play throughout this episode and series as a whole. The sudden political and racial slant this series has turned the MCU into is something that's been a real issue throughout. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier feels torn between playing it straight and keeping to the goofy Marvel humor, and in a way this actually undermines some of the more important topics being discussed. Given the connection this has to the MCU, and the lack of racial issues being brought up in Civil War, Black Panther and all the other movies that have had a diverse cast, Falcon and the Winter Soldier stands out like a sore thumb. If this show had just decided to play it straight, it perhaps wouldn't be so much of an issue. Having Sam talk to Bradley about his harrowing experience, and then cut to fixing a boat joyously with a musical montage and cracking jokes with Bucky, is a great example of this really not working. With the finale up next, all the pieces are in play for another bombastic finish. In true Marvel fashion, it looks like we've got a world-ending plot in play, but on the whole, this has definitely been one of Marvel's weakest entries in its expansive universe. The new Captain America, Episode 6 of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, begins with Carly mobilizing her troops. Sam and Bucky both show up too, with the former confirming that he's called on backup to stop her. Well, that backup comes in the form of Sharon, who reveals herself after shedding her disguise. Wearing a brand new Stars and Stripes suit, Falcon introduces himself as Captain America. While he fights with Batroc, Carly rings Bucky and questions whether he's fighting on the right side or not. Well, Bucky ignores this and instead tasks Falcon with abandoning his fight with Batroc to stop a helicopter full of hostages. Meanwhile, Carly decides to kill the other hostages she has, believing the movement is strong enough to go on without them. She also tells the others this is the only way to make people listen to their message. Bucky appears though, and puts a massive spanner in the works as he begins fighting against them all. Carly, unable to see her plan fail, decides to start a fire as a distraction. It doesn't work though, as wildcard John Walker marches up to Carly. Let's finish this. After some antagonizing chatter about hostages and Lemur, Walker is enraged. While he fights the Flag Smashers, Bucky frees the hostages from the back of the truck. John Walker and Carly both fight, with the former finding himself morally conflicted. The choice is between apprehending Carly or stopping a jeep full of people falling. It's either saving lives or getting revenge. Eventually he chooses the former, which sees Walker pounced on by Carly and the others. The jeep rests precariously on the edge. Up in the air, Sam continues to play a game of cat and mouse with the helicopter. Thanks to some perfect timing, he teams up with Ayla and manages to thwart the threat, freeing the prisoners up in the air, while making sure the pilot makes a splash landing. Falcon jumps into the thick of action at the right time, saving the truck as Isaiah Bradley happens to be among the crowd cheering. "That's Black Falcon right there?" he exclaims, pointing at Sam. The other crowd members turn to him though. "Nah, that's Captain America." Damn right it is, fella. Carly sneaks off but finds herself face to face with the power broker who reveals herself to be Sharon. Batroc appears too and demands he be paid for his services. This eventually leads to his death. Sam is brought over by the sound of the gunshot, leading to a standoff with Carly. Only, Sam refuses to fight back. He takes Carly's blows and tries to convince her to see reason. Just before she fires her gun, Sharon shoots Carly in the gut. As she bleeds out, she apologizes to Sam. The new Captain America helps Carly to the ambulance and speaks to the reporters on the scene. Given the senators are there too, he directs his qualms toward them. He tells the politicians that they have just as much power as an insane god and asks them all how they're going to use it moving forward. At the raft, this floating Wakandan prison ship, Zemo listens to the news and hears that the Flag Smashers and Carly have been stopped. Meanwhile, John Walker is reassigned as a U.S. agent, complete with a black and red outfit. Bucky and Sam both tie up loose ends too. This includes taking Isaiah to the museum where a new statue has been erected to commemorate his sacrifice for the country. During the mid-credit sequence, Sharon Carter is given a full pardon and also introduced as the new Agent Carter. As she walks away, she phones her contact outside and informs them that super soldiers may be off the table, but that's only the start. She now has access to weapons and government plans, which are definitely a good start. Looks like we've got a new antagonist on our hands. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier bows out with a largely predictable and formulaic ending. For much of this 6-episode series, Marvel's latest series has felt like business as usual at MCU HQ. The only difference here comes from the political slant, and in particular the emphasis on racial bias and hatred towards Sam and Isaiah. I've said it before in these recaps, but that angle is absolutely fine if it's consistent with the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, which it's not. Civil War, Black Panther and all the other MCU movies, especially those including Nick Fury and War Machine, have never been a target of racial hatred throughout the Marvel Universe. In fact, if you'll remember, War Machine was actually rebranded as Iron Patriot and heralded as an American symbol. The final speech, while powerful, also feels a little shoehorned, and likening big corn senators to an immortal god is pretty ridiculous. After all, I'm sure Galactus has something to say about all that. After WandaVision, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier bows out with an indifferent slice of superhero action. While it's been a fun ride at times, it's also a show that's unlikely to be remembered for years to come next to so many other heavy-hitting series.